alive! It is the best time of the week, and I am delighted to be joining you here today for a very special Friday's Live session. So welcome wherever you are, whether it's good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Do let me know where you are joining in from today. I am coming to you from London. We had some very wet and windy weather earlier, so do let me know what the weather's like with you. I always enjoy our weather checkups across the country and the world. So we've got a packed session as ever for you, and we've got the lovely Daisy in the comments today. So it is flower power today with myself, Rose, and the lovely Daisy. So I can see already we've got Gina joining us from a dull, damp Lincolnshire, yes, and Andrea from a very wet Stoke-on-Trent. Yeah, we are hitting that autumnal weather after that very sort of unseasonable warm weather. Very bizarre for October. Let's see who else we've got Pickles joining us, and Shirley's over on YouTube with lots of rain and wind. In Cambridgeshire it's sunny now, and it is cheering up here in London as well. I hear at least in the southeast we are due for a sunny but cold weekend. Jean's joining us, Georgia, Karen, Kim, hello. So what have we got for you today? Well, we've got our new records of the week, and they are from Oxfordshire. And because it's October and October is Black History Month, we're going to be taking a little look at some Black history on the archive for the life of Robert Wedderburn, who was a religious radical. And we're going to be taking a look at his life using our newspapers. And we're also going to be taking a look at the Dove family. So they were a British Sierra Leonean family in the early 20th century. And we also have our question of the week too, which I will come back to. Our question of the week is, how have you overcome your biggest challenges in your family history research? How have you overcome your biggest challenges in your family history research? We will come back to that after we've taken a look at our new records and just seeing who else is with us today. We've got Victoria, the sun is coming through. Ellen in Roscoe, Illinois, we're at 12 degrees. It's cold with Ellen. We've got Jennifer in a windy Devon. Sarah joining us from Wexford. Rosie, it's pouring in Shropshire. Anya, it's lovely and sunny here in Fife, but it's cold. And Lynn joining in from BC. Well, welcome one and all. I'm just going to bring up our new records of the week. And we've got a lovely batch of Oxfordshire records for you this week. And they are from 1524 all the way through to 1976. And I love to sort of have a dive into the background of a county, and I've got my kind of Oxfordshire mood board here, and in the centre there I found a lovely infographic of Oxfordshire. Now this was from 1982, I believe, from the Illustrated London News. So in 1982 the population of Oxfordshire was 515,000. It lists the main towns there, including Oxford and Banbury, and if you haven't checked out our new records yet, Daisy has kindly popped the link there for you to have a look there. You may also wonder what Queen Elizabeth I is doing there on the left-hand side. Well, she is actually standing on a map of Oxfordshire. This painting was to commemorate her visit to the county in 1952. So that's what you did in the Elizabeth era. You painted a picture of someone standing on the map. No accounting for taste. And then finally we've got some Morris dancers there, and this colourful advert appeared in the Illustrated London News in 1951, and I've actually clipped out what the advert was for. It was actually for a car, the Triumph Mayflower, and these Morris dancers were performing in the Oxfordshire village of Brampton. And also, we've updated our newspaper collection as well. We've got one new newspaper and some great updated newspapers. They are from 1853 through to 1994. So we'll discuss those later as well. Okay, so let's have a look at our baptism records first of all. And Karen is asking, some of my family come from Oxfordshire. Are they images or indexes? So this collection it is indexes, but they have quite a decent amount of information there for you. So Oxford Baptisms, it's a new collection of over 250,000 records, and 22,000 of these are brand spanking new to the site. So I thought about Oxfordshire. Again, Karen and I always have connections. I think we're related. I have an Oxfordshire link. It's way back, but it's my family name that is Slade that I'm linked to, and Lucy Slade, who was born in the 1700s. So however many times great grandmother of mine. So I had to dip into the baptisms to look for Slades. I didn't find Lucy, unfortunately, but I found Elizabeth Slade, who was baptised in the wonderfully named village of Britwell, Salome, in December 1824. So Oxfordshire, I noticed when I was looking at this collection, has some really great place names, including Britwell, Salome. And I found it sort of very Midsummer Murders. I think Midsummer Murders is based in Oxfordshire, so that kind of makes sense. And there's a lovely depiction of Priory Farm in Britwell, Salome there from the Illustrated Sporting and Dramatic News in 1957. And back to the baptism record, we get the date of baptisms, parents' name. So Elizabeth's parents were Wright and Rose Slade. And I tracked Elizabeth down in the 1841 census, and I found her that she was in service in nearby Watlington. But sadly, Elizabeth passed away a year later and was buried in Britwell, Salome. Few more people joining us. Hello, Heather. It's sunny and cold in Edinburgh. Welcome. And now we're on to our marriages. So there are 670,000 records in this collection of Oxfordshire marriages. And I'm going to stick with my Slade theme here. And I went back to the 1600s to find this record of a marriage of John Slade to Mary Barnes in May 1668 in a village called Marsh Baldon. So another great name. The Oxfordshire has some wonderful names, and I'd love to sort of dig into their origins a little bit more. And you can see the church there, St. Peter's, where they were married. And we have our newspapers, which gives some great context to our Oxfordshire records. So we've got an extract there from the Oxford Times from the 6th of April 1867 about the village of Marsh Baldon. And a fire had broken out in a hovel in Marsh Baldon, which was said to have been caused by a 4-year-old boy. I don't know how he managed to do that. Anyway, it took 40 minutes for the fire engine from Oxford to arrive, and there was another 2 fire engines sent from a nearby stately home. A cottage was destroyed. Thankfully, no one else was hurt. And the newspaper cutting extends great credit to the residents in their village for the prompt and energetic action in assisting to extinguish the flames. Our final Oxfordshire category this week is our Oxfordshire burials, and they span the years 1558 through to 1976. So we're going up quite far with these records, and we have 36,000 brand new records in this collection. So where possible, you'll see the transcription for the birth date as well as the date of death. And we can see here the burial date of Elizabeth Lewis, who was buried on the 9th of May, 1892, at the age of 61 in Little Farringdon. And just diving into our censuses, we can see a little bit more about Elizabeth's life. In 1871, we can see this really busy household here. Elizabeth Lewis was married to George, who was a gardener, and they had 9 children at this point, and between the ages of 20 and 3 months. So one can only imagine. We also see that Elizabeth, she wasn't an Oxfordshire native. She was actually just born just across the border in Gloucestershire, in Oddington. Okay, so Karen's got she's got Browns in her Oxfordshire family. Line moved to Tottenham and married another Brown. Okay, wonderful stuff. Right, and now we are on to our newspapers. We've got a treat for you this week, and we've got our new title, which is the Scottish Cinema, and we have some really great titles already as part of our collection that shows the early cinema industry. So we've got cinema industry titles which are full of wonderful advertisements like the Bioscope and the Kinematograph Weekly. And I can see that Daisy has very kindly put a link into the Scottish Cinema, which is our new title this week. And this was dedicated to the Scottish cinema industry. So it was published in Glasgow. It was founded in 1919, and it's a really wonderful read. So it was devoted entirely to the cinema trade in Scotland. So fascinating if you're interested in the early history of cinema, or indeed cinema in Scotland. So it's packed with adverts for all the films that were on at the time, and also with everything that you would fill your cinema with. So from the latest projectors to the latest seating. So it's a really sort of wonderful way to immerse yourself in those early years of cinema, just when it was picking up to cinema's golden age, and it was this new and exciting method of entertainment. And we've also updated 22 of our existing titles this week. And just a reminder, we are always adding new pages to our existing titles as well. So we've had big updates in our Northern Irish collection of newspapers, including to Ireland's oldest newspaper, which is the Belfast Newsletter and the Ballymena Observer. And we've also updated the Wicklow Newsletter from the Republic of Ireland. And Kim says you just get lost for hours reading through the articles, and that's it. It's just such a classic thing. You go and you're looking for one thing, and then there's a strange or interesting article like next to it, and you just get lost. And I found so many wonderful stories doing this. Or sometimes I just like to type in, like a phrase like missing heiress, or astonishing occurrence, like those sort of combination of words, and you can really find some fascinating stories. And and just a few more of our updated titles: the Guernsey Evening Press and Star, the Aberdeen Free Press, and also we've updated the Uganda Herald, which is one of the earliest newspapers in Uganda. So it's been a busy week as ever. And on to our question of the week, where I can see that there have been some answers coming through. So I will just repeat that question again. Is how have you overcome your biggest challenges in your family history research? And it may be that still sort of is a particular challenge that you're still encountering. And I will just take this away and have a look at some of the answers that have been coming through. And Karen, DNA has helped unlock 2 brick walls. And I was thinking, when I was thinking about this question, well, what has helped me is those sort of alternative sources sometimes that you can turn to. And through DNA, I had my own sort of research confirmed. I thought I tracked down my grandparents' family. My dad didn't know anything about his father, and it was DNA that confirmed that to me. And I was contacted by a great aunt that I never knew I had. So it's really kind of affirming to use those different methods to overcome those challenges in family history research. And we've got Ellen, a long one. That's fine. We love one. we love the detail, Ellen. So she's been looking for a direct Witter ancestor who did something in the Revolutionary War. Finally found a grumpy letter from an 85-year-old Joseph Witter complaining about not being repaid for the money he loaned in the revolutionary cause, along with the receipts. Score. Oh, definitely. And that's the other kind of records, documentations that all the letters that our ancestors leave behind, and other kind of documents. And I'm really excited, actually. Tomorrow I am going home to my parents' house in Sussex, and my mum has uncovered a box full of letters in the loft. So from my grandparents, my great uncle, from the 1960s, so I'm so excited to go home tomorrow and have a read of those letters, and just sort of, it just adds so much sort of colour, and to have your ancestors' handwriting, it's a blessing. And yeah, Kim, there's DNA. After 12 years of researching an impossible great-grandfather, it was DNA that solved his true identity and revealed lots of cousins, also ancestors worse than he was. Yeah, it's so, DNA has really changed the game in that regard, that to use that as another option for overcoming those genealogical hurdles. I've got Jean. I'm still to solve my 2 times great-grandparents who came to England around 1874 or 1876. And we all have those challenges that are just super hard. And I spoke a couple of months ago about my genealogical nemesis, who is my fiance's 2 times great-grandmother, and how it's just been so difficult to try and find her. But what was really helpful was coming on here and getting everybody's ideas. I think talking to the community, I think because everyone's got such a great experience, it can really give you some great ideas. And definitely I was using everybody's hints and tips to try and solve that one. So it's good to sort of talk through. It's that classic thing, isn't it, that 2 eyes are better than 1, 3 eyes are better. Yeah. Anya, it's taking a night class that helped me a lot. Yes, these courses, and there are some great courses out there. Also watching F&P Fridays, shout out. You love that. Roots Tech, yes, absolutely. There's so much available at Roots Tech, and bouncing ideas off friends or informants at forums or through FHS. I've sent emails to churches chasing one church minister ancestor from the 18th century and have his signature now, and I love that. And as a vicar's daughter, I sort of love those requests coming through, and because some churches still have their records stored on site. So I, sort of the budding genealogist in me, would really enjoy looking through those baptism registers, and just soaking up the history. And we've got Matthew joining from Watford. The question of the week, Matthew, that is, how have you overcome your biggest challenges in your family history research? So ideas around DNA, courses, forums, that kind of thing. I'm still working on probably my biggest family history challenge. So I will let you know if I find anything else about Mary, my fiance's great-great-great-grandmother. Okay, so the next part, I thought I'd take a look, because it is Black History Month this October. I wanted to take a look at some figures from Black British history. And just before I do that, I see we've got some more answers coming in with Gina. My biggest hurdle that I'm yet to solve is finding the birth registration for my great-grandfather and then his death. Some people have added a death date to records that isn't correct, and that can be such a frustration. And I had a very similar thing like this, and it was down to misspelling. The surname was Maguire, and it had been mutilated, is probably the word for it. And I couldn't find his death certificate of death record for ages. So that was it'd been taken down wrong at the time. So that can be a big hurdle to get over. And we've got Sue. Sue's is joining. She's been to have her jabs. I had my jabs, and they have been really painful. I wasn't able to lift up my arm for a little while, so I hope you're all right. Sue, I hope you feel better soon. So let's dive into the life now of Robert Wedderburn. So in today's session, I'd like to try and help shine a light on some figures from Black British history and how we can attempt to tell their stories using records from Findmypast. And as Daisy said, this is exciting. Keep your eyes peeled for Monday, and there will be some interesting Black history stories joining the blog. And today I'd like to have a look at the life of Robert Wedderburn, a British Jamaican tailor who became a religious radical, and he authored a book entitled The Horrors of Slavery. So this book was written in 1824, so sort of during that abolition movement. And to learn more about Robert Wedderburn, who is pictured here, and this picture was actually printed in that book, The Horrors of Slavery, and to learn more about his life and views, I'll be drawing mainly on our newspapers, but also using our vital records, our marriages and death records, and also our crime records to illuminate this Black British story from 200 years ago. And we also have a really excellent resource to learn more about Robert Wedderburn. And this is our Legacies of British Slavery collection. Now, this collection was actually put together by UCL, the university. And what it does is bring together the names of those who received compensation following British government's abolition of slavery in 1833. So compensation was awarded to those financially involved in the enslaving of people, not the people that they enslaved. And this was compensation for this loss of forced labour. Now, Robert Wedderburn himself was not compensated, but his wider family were. And this database is so interesting. His entry contains a short biography of Robert Wedderburn's life. It tells us that he was born in Kingston, Jamaica in 1762 as the illegitimate son of enslaver James Wedderburn Colville and an enslaved African woman who was called Rosanna. So it was these Colville-Wedderburn relations who received the compensation. Whilst Robert's mother, Rosanna, she was sold when she was 5 months pregnant. And we learn that when Robert was born, he was actually deemed free from birth. He then served in the Royal Navy, and he moved to Britain in 1778, where he worked as a tailor. He married and became licensed as a Unitarian preacher in 1813. He became increasingly involved in radical religion, and in 1824 he published his work, The Horrors of Slavery, which was a stinging attack on his own father and the slave trade. And this then provoked a furious reaction from his half-brother, Andrew Colville. So it's a lot to take in, but it's a really great collection, this one, a fascinating sort of sobering collection that we have on our site. And I just can see Anya's recommended a BBC show, a great segment earlier about Ignatius Sancho, who was the first Black man to gain the right to vote in England. Incredible. I will have to check that one out. Thank you for sharing, Anya. And just seeing we've got some more answers coming in for the question of the week. William, he's managed to overcome one of his biggest challenges by guesswork. In 2009, I proved my great-granddad's brother died in 1995, not on HMS Hood in World War II. Met lots of newly found relatives as a result. Oh, wonderful stuff there, William. And I think Christine, with lateral thinking coming to the rescue there, looking at siblings, finding them in the censuses, gosh, yes, solving her great-grandmother's maiden name was Foster, not Rhett, but she died before 1851, which is always a struggle, and only knowing sort of a place, a county of birth can be so difficult. And yeah, it's that meticulous work of sorting through those birth records, those baptism records. I have been there, and it is so worth it when you get that answer. And we've got Ellie with us. Hello, Ellie. So Ellie's actually been at the National Archives today. I'm very jealous. I hope you had a great time there, Ellie. So back to Robert Wedderburn, and we actually find him in our records shortly after his move to England. And what you can see here is his marriage record to Elizabeth Ryan. Now, their marriage took place in 1781, and this is from our Boyd's Marriage Index, and it gives them the place of their marriage as the wonderfully named St Catherine Cree Church. That is also known as the Church of St Catherine Cree in Aldgate in the City of London. So a very historic church. And you can see the interior there just behind that record, which is from our newspaper collection. Also from our newspaper collection is this clipping from the Suffolk Chronicle. Now, this is from August 1817. So we fast forwarded a little bit by now. Now, this describes Robert Wedderburn interrupting a meeting. And in our newspapers, we see the varying ways in which his race is described. So sometimes it's mentioned, sometimes it's not mentioned. But this piece does dub him as a person of colour. So that, outmoded language. And it describes how he disturbed a meeting by coming into the room and getting on a table where the chairman of this meeting sat. And this article is particularly disturbing in its attempts to cast Wedderburn as a savage figure. It describes how, and this is reading from the article, his appearance, which was most wretched, and the warmth and the force of gesture which he expressed himself, considerably alarmed some of the ladies who sat near, and the impression was that the man was insane. When on the table he was without shoes and stockings, if such they might be called, but ill concealed his brawny legs and feet. And you can feel that sort of thinly veiled prejudice in those lines. But Wedderburn was not to be put off. He begged for 10 minutes of the crowd's time, and he introduces himself as the son of James Wedderburn, Esquire of Jamaica, by Rosanna, his slave. And he describes, and this is a direct quote, in strong terms, the horrors of slavery. So this is some 7 years before the publication of his book with that same title. And he also addresses, interestingly, the situation in Ireland at the time, stating how the people of that fertile country were actually starving. So such displays of resistance and radicalism earned him a place in this George Cruikshank satirical print, which was published in that same year of 1817, and it was entitled A Peep into the City of London Tavern. And Robert Wedderburn is shown there alongside that central figure, who is social reformer Robert Owen. So Robert Wedderburn would actually go on to reject Christianity for a deist outlook. So that is celebrating and looking at the existence of God based purely on rational thought, without that kind of religious authority, and the idea that God is revealed through nature. And I was quite relieved when I was researching this story that I have my A-level in religious studies, just to unpick the doctrines here. So these displays of resistance, these increasingly radical religious beliefs would land Robert in trouble with the law. And this is why we find him in our crime, prisons and punishment records. This is from 1819, from the 1st of December 1819 to be precise. And this is an entry from the Newgate prison calendar. And Wedderburn's committal to prison had come from none other than the Lord Chief Justice himself. And his offence is listed, if you go to the original image, so always a reminder with these crime records, go to the original image. There's a lot of information to be mined there. And his offence is for libel on the Holy Scriptures. And again, he appears in our crime records, and this is again from that infamous prison of Newgate. And we get a description here, and we also learn his age. So he's 57 at this point in time. He's 5'4", dark complexion, hair and eyes, stoutish, and this really interesting phrase, made and born in Jamaica. We also see his occupation. He's still listing himself as a tailor, or calling himself a tailor, or if that might be what the authorities are calling him. We'll sort of see that variation into how he's described, whether he's a minister or a tailor. And we again got that crime written out for that libel on the Holy Scriptures. And unsurprisingly, this news of his imprisonment made the pages of the press. We see this report from the Windsor and Eton Express from the 23rd of January 1820. And out of these 4 different clippings here, this is the only one that actually refers to his race. He's called a mulatto man, of course an outdated and offensive term that refers to someone of mixed race. And the tone of this report on that's one on the top left-hand corner is different from the other ones. It says that Robert Wedderburn was brought up to plead to an indictment charging him with having, in the character of a preacher, uttered in address to his hearers certain wicked, blasphemous, and impious words, tending to bring the Holy Scriptures into contempt and to encourage irreligion and impiety in the minds of His Majesty's liege subjects, to the great scandal of the King and his laws. So we've got some really sort of grandiose terms here. And we see in these next clippings, though, that it's sort of it's referred to actually with the title of Reverend Robert Wedderburn. Let's not forget that he was actually licensed as a Unitarian preacher. So that first article sort of says, oh, he's claiming to be a minister, but that's not accurate. He was a minister, and we get a more moderate description of Robert Wedderburn and his supposed crimes, his alleged crimes, in the London Moderator, appropriately, and that's in the left-hand corner at the bottom there from May 1820. And this describes how the Reverend Robert Wedderburn, a dissenting minister, now under prosecution for blasphemy, was liberated from Newgate on Friday night on entering into reconnaissances, himself £100 and 2 sureties of £50 to appear and to take his trial at the sittings after this present Hilary term. And Cobbett's Evening Post, also that's on the right-hand side there, goes into a little bit more detail about his crimes and about his beliefs and his beliefs about the Bible. And he actually wrote a commentary on the Bible, which embodied all the doubts and criticisms of the skeptics from Vanini, Jordan Bruno, the French philosophers, and the deists of the present day. So why are these reports different in their tone regarding Robert Wedderburn and his beliefs? Well, Cobbett's Evening Post and the London Moderator, they were part of the radical press. And whilst they might not have supported Robert Wedderburn's more extreme religious views, at least for the day, they supported the freedom of speech, this radical press movement, which we see growing in the 1820s and going into the 1830s, this resistance to the establishment, this growth of a liberal movement, probably a bit stronger than liberal, indeed, sort of coming up against the establishment. And the really great thing, top tip also about these newspapers, is that they are part of our free to view collection on Findmypast. So you can just dive into these and have a read through at no cost, which is a great little tip there. So I can see, I'll come out of this for a second because I can see some more things coming in. And welcome, Andrew's been for an eye test. I think everybody's getting their sort of health MOTs at the moment. It is that time of year, isn't it? I've got Victoria with a tip here. In overcoming challenges, contacting others with matches and trees along with DNA. Yeah, that is exactly what happened to me. I was contacted by a Staveley cousin in Australia, which is always wonderful to receive those messages and think of all those sort of family members spread out across the world. And you can see Matthew, and I can see that there's been a couple of there's my face, yeah. I can see a couple of hints and tips coming through to Matthew on his biggest hurdle, who has spent over 20 years trying to track down the birth of Elizabeth Sullivan. According to her 1907 marriage, she was born in about 1888, and her father was John Sullivan. She was married in St George in the East London, but so far no trace of her has been found in birth certificate or christenings in that parish or those nearby. A family story says that she was Irish, but no trace of her has been found there. A big puzzle. Oof. Well, we do like a challenge though in this community, and yeah, I mean, like Sullivan O'Sullivan? Definitely could be an Irish link, and that's what Georgia suggested again. And we sort of see those changes of Irish surnames. I think I mentioned just now my Irish ancestor Maguire, that was changed. I've also got O'Callaghan's in my family tree, and quite soon you see the O being taken away, and the various spellings going on there. And Lynn's on a hunt for William Firth and his twin, who is Elizabeth, 2 times great grandmother, Mary Ann, and then the mother Mary Ann, who died from convulsions during childbirth. Oh gosh, and little John dying 4 weeks later. So good luck on your search there, Lynn. It's a sad story there with John and Mary and there. Daphne, welcome. Thanks for joining. Thanks for tuning in. And Jennifer over on YouTube. Finding my 3 times great grandfather in the poverty relief records from Ireland. He was a lender and borrower, and been looking for him for many years. Thank you, FMP, for these wonderful records. And it is those sort of less traditional, and especially when we're researching Irish ancestors, that we find vital information that helps us with these challenges. So it's sort of outside the census records, outside the birth, marriages and death records. So Jennifer, I'm so glad that you were able to have success in tracking down your 3 times great grandfather. More questions of the week. I love this. Matthew, some extra information there, and there's potential candidate. I think sometimes it is about filling out, if you have that candidate there, you're not quite sure of the fit, it is worth working on their family tree sort of separately, so you can sort of do that litmus test, that is that the right person, or will that person take you down a different route, so then you can rule them out. And Andrew, joining on an ancestor to anyone else's name was solved by getting the death certificate for the only person with the same name. Turned out everything else was wrong, and that death of the son of someone else in the family. I ended up with a 1 name study. Oh, it's always serendipitous, isn't it? And Daphne's still working on hers. She's a newspaper expert. Okay, wow. I think we're going to have lots of exciting newspaper content coming up in the next week. So stay tuned for that. Daphne and Sue, I'm trying to find the baptism of my 2 times great grandfather, Ramsay Ross. Official documents have all dates, all different dates and places in similar areas, and that can be so frustrating. But yeah, advice, stick with it, explore every avenue. Patience is always, as we know, a good one in this genealogy game. Right, so I'm going to get back to our Robert Wedderburn story, and there was one particular newspaper that went into real depth about Robert Wedderburn in 1820 and his beliefs and his trials, and this was Wooler's British Gazette. So this is another one of our radical newspapers, and it was founded by a Yorkshire-born radical called Thomas Jonathan Wooler, and it describes how Robert was on trial for certain speech uttered to an assembly in Hopkins Street near Windmill Street in October last. And interestingly, Wedderburn had pleaded not guilty, and the reason that he gives behind his not guilty plea is for the errors and the total neglect of his moral and religious education by his father. So he is blaming his father, the enslaver, for not providing him with an education. And it's really interesting that he uses that as his excuse. And indeed, the jury recognised this, and they commended him to the learned judge as a fit object for lenity. But it was Mr. Justice Bailey who sat in judgment of Robert Wedderburn. and he disagreed with the jury. He said there was no law in this country to prevent the defendant from entertaining his own opinions, nor to discuss those opinions with the learned, but he was not permitted to disseminate them amongst the unlettered multitude. So, owing his duty to the morals and religion of the country, Justice Bailey sentenced Robert Wedderburn to 2 years imprisonment in Dorchester jail. So there are many who think that Robert Wedderburn's radical religious views, were tied to his resistance of the establishment, an establishment that enslaved and profited from pain, that in attacking the structure of the establishment, its religion, he was resisting against the horrors of slavery with which he was all too well acquainted. So after his 2-year spell in prison, we find Robert Wedderburn again in the press, this time 10 years later in 1830. And this time he is in the Sheffield Independent in November 1830. And he's described how... My words, I do apologise. And so he's in the Sheffield Independent in November 1830, and it describes how Robert Wedderburn, who was then 69, was tried for keeping a disorderly house. A slightly different charge this time. Interestingly, his race is not mentioned here, but it's his ties to radicalism that are. He is described as one of the persons tried with Thistlewood for the Cato Street conspiracy. So the Cato Street conspiracy occurred in 1820, and it was a foiled plot to murder the then British Prime Minister, Lord Liverpool, along with his cabinet ministers. So this is another story, but the Cato Street conspiracy occurred in February 1820. And as we saw from the newspaper reports in 1820, this was the time that Robert Wedderburn was imprisoned, so he couldn't have actually been a member of those conspirators. But I suppose what it does, it illustrates Robert Wedderburn's ties to those kind of that radical resistance against the establishment. So this story, back to 1830, so Robert Wedderburn actually insisted that it wasn't a disorderly house. He was just keeping a house for destitute women. The judge didn't agree. He was sentenced to years imprisonment. But Robert Wedderburn, being Robert Wedderburn, he did not go down without a fight, and he delivered a most extraordinary speech. Now, the Courier on the 5th of November 1830 provides a lengthy account of this. And what's really great about this particular article is that we get to hear the words of Robert Wedderburn as they were transcribed by the newspaper. So Robert Wedderburn, he's an eloquent man. He describes how he's been in Britain for 51 years, and he says that he had taken a house 6 months prior to this to being arrested to help destitute women. Now, the court, they spoke about his record of blasphemy, and to which Robert Wedderburn is recorded as replying, "Pooh, pooh, I know what blasphemy is well enough. I suffered for it 2 years. Well, as I told you, I went among those ladies who were everywhere hunted down. I compassionated them, and I was resolved to protect them as far as I was able. So I wasn't able to live by the one house, so I took another." And he was ridiculed by the court. It's met with laughter, but Robert wasn't having any of it. He doubles down on his statement and he says, "Don't interrupt me. I love this country because I am opposed to tyranny and oppression of all men, and I shall always stand up in defence of the British Constitution. I am not a keeper of a disorderly house, but I keep, and I shall keep as long as I can, a house of refuge for destitute women." The recorder of the court, however, was resolute. He declared how Robert Wedderburn was lost to all sense of decency and how he was a disgrace to human nature. And he was sentenced to hard labour for 12 months. So, brutal treatment of the elderly man. And that is the last we hear really of Robert Wedderburn in our newspapers. And there is some doubt over when he died, but there is a Robert Wedderburn listed in the burial records from Bun Hill Burial Ground, and that's from the 4th of January 1835. The age matches his place of residence is Aldersgate in the City of London, so I think it is likely to be him. And Robert Wedderburn's legacy didn't die with him either, and that's really important to sort of point out. He, as well as his sort of resistance to the establishment being enshrined within the pages of our newspapers, Robert had children, and they had children, as you can see from this family tree here. And the Wedderburn name was carried through. And we also see that one of his descendants entered into the political arena too. So I've traced Robert Wedderburn's direct line through his son, Jabez Wedderburn. He was born in 1796. And in turn, through Jabez Wedderburn to his son, Robert Wedderburn's grandson, also Jabez Wedderburn, who was born in 1827. So the family, they stay in London, and actually they become fixtures sort of south of the river. And this is where we find Jabez Wedderburn Jr. living in the 1871 census in Deptford. And actually he's a scale maker, so making out of weighing scales. So that becomes the family trade of this branch of Robert Wedderburn's descendants. So in, I see Daisy's got some love for Southeast London. We love a bit of Southeast London. I lived there kind of fairly recently as well. It's a good place. And in the 1871 census, Jabez Wedderburn Jr., he's making his living as a scale maker. His sons, Robert and George, are in the same profession. And then we also see his younger son, Frederick. And so Frederick is Robert Wedderburn's great-grandson, and he follows in the scale-making profession. So we see him in the 1911 census there, which is the census record there below. And he's a scale maker too. And in 1911, Frederick Wedderburn is 51. He has 6 living children, and his sons are following his trade, living in the Deptford area. Okay, so by 1921, we're on to Robert's great-great-grandson, who is Herbert John Wedderburn. He is a scale maker as well. His father, Frederick, has passed away, and his mother, Anne, is head of the household, although it is Herbert himself who fills out the census return. And guess what? He's working as a scale maker in New Cross. And Herbert would then go on to have a son. So where are we now? We are Robert Wedderburn's great-great-great-grandson. And his name was Kenneth William Wedderburn, who was known as Bill. So he's the chap pictured here. And he would have a long and illustrious career in the law. And he actually was made a life peer in 1977. And he was Lord Wedderburn. And he was affiliated with the Labour Party. And I found this little snipping from the Scotsman from May 1983 that I think his ancestor, Robert Wedderburn, would have been really proud of. Lord Wedderburn had actually intervened in the deportation of a young mother and widow, Afia Begum, who had just arrived in Britain with her 18-month-old daughter to join her husband in Britain from Bangladesh, only to find out that he'd been killed in a fire. So he intervened in her deportation. So there's a really fascinating story about Robert Wedderburn's legacy down through the generations. And just a few more recommendations from me for Black History Month from our newspaper collection. And there's 2 titles that I'd just like to give a shout out to. And that is the journal The Keys, which is on the left-hand side. This appeared between 1933 and 1953. And it was the organ of a society called the League of Coloured Peoples. So this was an early Black civil rights organisation in Britain, founded by Dr. Harold Moody. So we've got the 1930s years as part of our collection. So it's a really fascinating record of Black British history from this period. And then on the right, we have the African Times and Orient Review, which was founded in London in 1912 by the Sudanese Egyptian actor and political activist Duse Muhammad Ali. So its foundation stemmed from the first Universal Races Conference in 1911, and it took a revolutionary anti-imperialist stance and promoted Pan-Africanism. And I see very kindly Daisy popped the links there to the keys. And yeah, I think we've got enough time. We're all right for time. And so I was browsing through the pages of the African Times, and it's got some lovely images in it. And I came across this picture of Private Frank S. Dove of the Tank Corps, and you can see that's Frank on the right-hand side, and he was featured in the pages of the African Times for his contribution to the war effort alongside other African soldiers. And the African Times also printed a poem that he had written, and it's a really moving poem, and it's about that unease he feels at the fact that he's awarded a medal for bravery when so many of his friends and the other soldiers around him were so brave too, as he says, for thousands had done likewise. And I recognise the name Dove, because Frank, also known as Francis, was the brother of entertainer Evelyn Dove, and she was a really pioneering force, and she's pictured there on the stage on the left-hand side. So in the 1920s, Evelyn Dove drew comparisons with the legendary Josephine Baker, and in 1939 she actually made history by being the first black singer to be featured on BBC Radio. So Frank and Evelyn were the children of a white English mother, Augusta Winchester, and a Sierra Leonean Creole barrister called Francis or Franz Dove. Just an aside, so the Sierra Leone Creole ethnic group, they are descendants of freed African-American, Afro-Caribbean, and liberated African slaves who settled in Western Sierra Leone between 1787 and 1885 under the Sierra Leone Company as a place of freedom. And we actually have the records for the Sierra Leone resettlement scheme from 1787 available on Findmypast. So we can trace the Dove family through our records, and we can see how Frank joined the Tank Corps through our military records. You can see his military records just up there. And he was actually awarded his military medal for his bravery in the Battle of Cambrai. And that is that medal that he refers to in his poem. So we've got his military records, and he was a really multi-talented person. In 1920, he actually represented Britain in the Antwerp Olympics as a boxer. And after doing that, he returned to his law studies in Oxford, which had been interrupted by the First World War. So we find Frank Sidney Dove there in the 1921 census in a boarding house. So it's a transitional time for him. He's studying the law. He's living with his wife Amelia, and he is working studying law at the Inner Temple. And we find mention of Frank Dove in 1927 from the Mid-Sussex Times, where he was summoned for driving a motor car in a dangerous manner. This will be significant, remember this fact. And by the 1939 Register, he is referring to himself as Francis S. Dove. So he's moving away from that younger name of Frank, styling himself like his father, who was also known as Francis. And like his father, Frank Dove became a barrister. And this name change is one of those things that does make him a little bit harder to track down, especially in our newspapers with those name variations. And tracking people down in our passenger list can also be a bit tricky too, because of the use of initials to replace first names. So this is true of the outgoing passenger lists, which are pictured there. And there's a record for an FS Dove leaving Britain in 1952. So FS Dove, how can we prove that it's Frank? Well, it says that he's a barrister and he's living in Cambridge Road in London, and that's the same address that his 1939 register record is. So he is bound for Takoradi, which is a city in Ghana, which was then known as the Gold Coast. And this record is from February 1950. Right. So sadly, the next time we hear about Frank Sidney Dove is in our newspapers in 1957, when his local newspaper, the Battersea-based South Western Star, announced his death. So Frank Dove died in hospital in Wolverhampton 2 days after driven his car into a tree. And you'll remember that dangerous driving conviction from 30 years ago, before in 1927. So Frank was only 59 at the time. He'd just returned from the Gold Coast, where he had been living for 7 years. So we can see that record from the passenger list. That was him travelling out. So he would stay there for a long time. So as well as relaying the sad news about Frank's death, we also learn more about Frank's life. And indeed, this article celebrates his life, highlighting Frank's prowess as a boxer. So he knocked out the Battersea pro boxer, Eddie Hearn, who's not to be confused with the present day promoter Eddie Hearn, at the age of 50. So Frank, at the age of 50, secured a knockout blow. And this article says that Frank was actually the oldest fighter to have ever competed. So amazing stuff. And we also get that further information about Frank and his actions in the First World War that led to him being awarded the Military Cross. And he actually rescued a man from a burning tank. So such high levels of bravery. And in a moving note, the article actually says that a friend of the rescue man actually attended Frank's funeral. And we also get the result of the inquest into Frank Dove's death being reported in the Battersea newspaper, the South Western Star, in March 1957. And Frank is described as a Battersea barrister. And interestingly, both these articles, they don't refer to his race. Again, it's an interesting that omission there. And it was judged that his death had been caused by the careless driving of his Jaguar. And Frank's son Anthony actually spoke at the inquest, and he said that his father had actually said in the hospital, so he regained consciousness before passing away, that the brakes of his car had refused to work. And Frank is described as a strong, healthy man with good eyesight and being an experienced driver. Nevertheless, the coroner commented how it is inexplicable why he should have swerved from side to side and hit a tree on the other side of the road. So it was a really tragic end to the life of this gifted man. And I'm really sorry. I don't want to end on like a down note. I myself. I didn't mean to do that. I really hope that these examples of Frank Dove and Robert Wedderburn show how we can use the collections, our newspaper collections, to really show how Black British history can be explored further in our records, and how our newspaper records can also be used to complement our census records and our vital records, our birth, marriages and deaths. So thank you so much for joining me today. I think there's a lot of searching to be done. There's some challenges to overcome. So I think I know what some of us might be doing this weekend. So happy family history work. I will be all amongst my letters tomorrow when I travel down to see my parents. So I'll be immersed in genealogy too over the weekend. So thanks so much for joining me, and we will see you again very soon. Take care and have a lovely weekend.